Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we're going to highlight something called the SALT deduction cap. We're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, so on and so forth. The reason we're going to talk about this today is because it is an example of one of my favorite things in politics, which is an opportunity to showcase some political hypocrisy, which I always love to do. So who can remember back to a time when a man named Donald Trump was in office and he had what was called the Trump tax cuts? He cut the corporate tax rate down to 21% and cut individual tax rates for most Americans. The Democrats at that time were outraged. They complained that Donald Trump was cutting taxes for his corporate friends and the wealthiest of Americans at the expense of the middle and working classes. They ignored the fact that the 35 million Americans earning between $50,000 and $100,000 a year saw a decrease in their taxes that amounted to $31 billion. So the 35 million Americans who earn that much saw a $31 billion reduction in their taxes. That's the middle class right there, $50,000 to $100,000. That's who we're talking about. Not much of a tax cut when the middle class received half of the benefits, but that is besides the point what we're talking about today. Let's put that aside for a moment. The Democrats have a position on tax cuts throughout history that they say that tax cuts are bad. Cutting taxes for the wealthy is a bad thing. This is the Democratic opinion. I think we can all agree that Democrats say this. I don't think it's a straw man to point out the fact that Democrats, for the most part, say tax cuts are bad. Bernie Sanders, in fact, he's made an entire career out of saying that the rich don't pay their fair share. That's the whole giant talking point on the left these days. The rich don't pay their fair share. Well, that's obviously ludicrous, but for a moment, let's just say that it's a mainstream Democratic talking point. That's why I love the hypocrisy on full display here when it comes to the SALT cap tax. SALT is an acronym. It stands for the state and local tax credit. Basically, the IRS allows people to write off some of their state and local taxes to lower their federal taxes. The SALT cap is the thing that was put in place to limit the amount of money that you're allowed to write off. Now, when the evil, vile Donald Trump was president, he lowered that SALT cap tax limit to $10,000. So he actually lowered the amount of money that you could write off on your federal taxes. But the Democrats are currently very sneakily trying to raise the limit of the amount that you can write off back in their giant mess of a spending bill, otherwise known as the Build Back Better plan. Now, there are currently two versions of this in the works, one of them in the House and one in the Senate. The one in the House seems like it's the one that's most likely to go forward. So as of right now, the one in the House would raise the $10,000 limit to $80,000. And the other one in the Senate would basically make the cap unlimited for anyone making less than $400,000 and then only keep the SALT cap tax for the ultra wealthy people making more than $400,000. Now, the Urban Tax Policy Center did the math and concluded that 94% of the benefits of these plans would go to people making over $175,000 a year. So let's think for a second. That doesn't sound right. The Democrats, who rail against the wealthy constantly, are pushing for a bill that will give tax breaks basically only to people making more than $175,000 a year. Why is that? That seems strange. Well, the reasoning is very simple. Democrats, they don't actually hate the rich. What they found is a nice talking point that people identify with. They find that attacking the rich is easy because the rich make up a very small percentage of the population, and people for some reason are under the misconception that the rich don't pay taxes. So what they really hate more than the rich is Republicans. And this tax cut, while there are some individual Republicans who will benefit from it, it's really going to benefit Democrats more than anything else. Think about this for a moment. What state and localities have the highest rate of taxes? It's the Democratic blue states and blue cities. So this tax credit here, what it allows you to do is if your state has a high rate of taxes, you can write that off against your federal taxes and pay less in federal taxes. Now, I think this is a bad policy. I think you should get rid of state and local tax deductions entirely. You choose to live in a state. If you want to live in a state that has high taxes because you like the state, then live in that state, but pay the taxes. It doesn't get to come at the expense of the federal government for you to pay your local taxes. Everyone pays the federal government. Whether or not you agree with it or not, I think that the income tax is pretty ridiculous in general, but also we have it. So we should all pay our fair share. I do agree with that. If it exists, we should all pay our fair share. If it didn't exist in a perfect world, that's a different story, but it does exist. So why is it that if you live in a state that has high taxes, that the federal government should basically subsidize your state at the expense of federal government money? Doesn't make any sense to me. And the Democrats are pushing for this because Democrats live in states that have higher taxes. So this definitely benefits the blue states more than the red states. For example, states like, let's see, off the top of my head if I can list all of them. So Texas, Florida, Nevada. There's a couple of others. I can't remember off the top of my head. Those are the three big ones. I think there's 6 in total that don't have an income tax. Oh, I think Alaska is another one. But all these red states don't even have an income tax. So this doesn't apply to them at all. But all these blue states that have high taxes, this is something that it incentivizes people not to live there, but not to move. It's not going to make someone move to California, but people in California who have to pay that 13% state tax, the highest in the country, well, if they don't have to pay federal taxes at the same rate as the rest of the country because they get to deduct that, well, what's it matter? But now all of a sudden, the rest of the country is subsidizing California. That's what this is. So let's go through a list here just to demonstrate with some data. We always like to have data. Here is what I mean when I say this only benefits the blue states, or it disproportionately benefits the blue states. Here's a list of the states with the highest taxes right here. In order, highest taxes. Number 1, California, blue. Number 2, Hawaii, blue. Number 3, New Jersey, blue. Number 4, Oregon, blue. Number 5, Minnesota, blue. Number 6, New York, blue. Number 7, Vermont, blue. Number 8, Iowa, red. Number 9, Arizona has been called purple, but has been voting Democrat. Voted for Joe Biden. Number 10, Wisconsin, blue. Number 11, Maine, purple, but went to Biden in the last election. So of the top 11 states, 10 of them went for Joe Biden. 10 of them are almost safely Democratic at this point. Arizona is probably the most purple of those, and Arizona it's voting Democrat recently. So that's what I say when I say of the top 11 states that tax the most, 10 of them are Democratic states. That's why Democrats are pushing for this. This is hypocrisy. This is hypocrisy at its finest. We cannot overstate this. The Democrats are pushing for a thing that will benefit the ultra-wealthy who live in blue states to incentivize them to keep living in blue states. Because guess what? When you have to pay a 13% California tax and your full federal tax, that's an incentive for you to move, to say, what am I getting for this ridiculous state tax in California that I can't also get in Texas where we don't tax like this? So the Democrats have defended this, by the way, by pointing out the fact that Republicans, when they're in power, they cut taxes too. Yeah, that's the Republican platform. Republicans run on cutting taxes. Republicans run on supply side economics. That is what we do. I'm saying we here, although I've routinely denied that I'm a Republican because this is me against the Democrats. The people who run against the Democrats, who, for lack of any better wording, I'll say we for a moment, we who think that the Democrats have become the party of nonsense, which is where I sit currently, we look at this hypocrisy and say that the Republicans run on a platform to cut taxes, but Democrats never do that. They think tax cuts are bad. That's what they've always said. So when they point to Republicans, the fact that Republicans have cut taxes when they're in power. So what? So you're going back on your word. All of a sudden, you're for the ultra wealthy, provided that they live in blue states. That's ridiculous, and it's just hypocrisy. And it's not only hypocrisy; it's nakedly partisan. When Republicans cut taxes, it's across the board. It's not in Texas. They didn't cut income taxes. Well, not that there's an income tax. They didn't cut taxes for people who only live in Texas. They cut taxes for people who are in an income bracket that affected the entire country. This only benefits Democratic states. It really does. So just remember that. When they're pushing this Build Back Better plan, this $1.75 trillion spending doonboggle, when they're pushing this bill, there's things like this in there that are going to get hidden because they're going to sell you on free pre-K for everyone else and all these wonderful things that everyone thinks they're just going to magically pay for themselves. But it's going to come with a lot of stuff like this in there. A lot of stuff that is hidden that they're not going to talk about. No one's talking about the salt cap tax limit being increased. They're not running to make sure that you know that that's also going to happen so that the super wealthy in blue states pay less taxes. The Democrats don't want you to know that, but it's in there. There's a lot of other nonsense in there too. We just wanted to highlight one example of it. And that's all we're going to do today. We're just highlighting a little bit of Democratic hypocrisy. I want to just say, ooh, you know what? Let's hold on 1 second. We're going to do this live. I should have had this beforehand, but give me 1 second here. We're gonna roll back here to the bookshelf and grab a book to recommend. And we're back. It's actually less of a book and more of I don't know, 30 pages, 20 pages, 20 pages. It's more of an essay. So this I'm holding up for those of you who are just listening. Trickle-down theory and tax cuts for the rich. This is an essay that Thomas Sowell wrote a long time ago that basically talks about the benefits of supply-side economics. This is going to be our required reading for the week. Trickle-down theory and tax cuts for the rich by Thomas Sowell. You can get it for like $5 on Amazon, or you can probably find it online for free. Anyway, that's where we're going to leave it today. Go educate yourself on the benefits of tax cuts, and then applaud the Democrats for cutting the taxes of the ultra-wealthy, because that's what they're doing. That's what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House are trying to do. They want to cut taxes for their wealthy donors in blue states. So let's applaud them for coming around to the Republican idea that taxes are bad. Anyway, we will catch you on the next episode. As always, I'm Tyler Chrestman. Hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.